Should the state subsidise people who want to have children? And to what extent? Back in 2017, the then Chancellor, George Osborne, limited the amount of universal credit to a family's first two children, arguing that most families considered their finances when deciding how many children to have. But the Chancellor now is under pressure to ditch that limit. And even Reform UK have said they'd scrap it to help boost the birth rate. So, with falling birth rates, should the state do more to subsidise the cost of children? Well, Evan, look, there are so many arguments here, but from an economic point of view, how should we be considering this?
OK, so I'm so glad we're doing this topic because it allows me to talk about one of the most interesting and influential and yet underappreciated economists, post-war economists, a guy called Gary Becker. And he got the Nobel Prize, actually, on his own. And most people don't get it in economics, a Nobel Prize on their own. They're always shared between two or three. He got it in 1992, partly for his work on families. He wrote in 1981, published a thing called A Treatise on the Family. And in that, he basically takes an economic view of why fertility rates fall as nations get richer. And honestly, it's probably not a full account of what's happened. And it is controversial. And he was considered rather eccentric for much of his career. But he basically takes it all as families like you, Sarah. You're just economically rational, and the number of kids you have...
Oh, no, I'm not.
Sorry,
first floor.
Yeah, well, that is one of the flaws. But you think about kids like you might think about cars or fridges. You're sort of how much upfront cost there is, what flow of benefits you get from it.
Hold on, Evan. I'm so sorry. You may think like that, but I do not think like that. And I think most families don't.
Most families don't do it consciously. But he thinks underneath it all, there is a kind of cost benefit going on in people's heads. So his take is this. It's really interesting. As societies have got richer, the big change is career opportunities for women have expanded enormously over the last 70 years. What that means, actually it should probably be an uncontroversial point. As women have better opportunities in the labour market, they want to spend less time at home looking after children. And so his insight was, as household earnings go up, the cost of staying at home and being a homemaker goes up. That's the opportunity you're foregoing by staying at home is really high. So as societies get richer, as women's opportunities in particular expand, obviously people will have fewer kids, right? Because now the women will go out. But that's not the only one. He also says, this is another really interesting one, in a kind of, imagine a Victorian society where you might have 8 kids and they're, going up the chimneys or whatever. You don't invest very much in your kids because there aren't great opportunities for them in the labour market. But modern world, just hear me out, modern world, there's a lot of benefit to investing in your children. And that probably means, as parents, you want to invest in fewer kids, but investing more in them. So you pay for their college, you kind of spend more time with them, and that expands their opportunities as well.
Okay, well, you look at any species, and in times where your children or the offspring are not going to survive, you have lots of them in harsh conditions. As soon as things get plentiful, and we're in a situation where you expect your child to survive, you have fewer of them. So that's the sort of biological.
That's a biological
imperative.
Sort of thing of the same thing. But look, what I think Becker what was so important about what he had to say decades ago was that as societies get richer, fertility rates drop. And what you'll hear in this whole debate about fertility rates collapsing across the West, not just the West, Japan and South Korea more extremely than elsewhere, what you'll hear is loads and loads of country-specific reasons. Like, well, in Britain, we haven't built enough houses, so people aren't having kids. Now, that may be true, but then why people in France, where they build lots of houses and have lots of room, why are they not having kids? This is such a ubiquitous
I need to chuck in one other factor, of course, which is that once you start work, it's never a good time to opt out and have children. And so women are having children later, and that is astonishing, that trend, in terms of what are known as geriatric mothers. And you're basically running into the end of your fertility.
Yeah, so you haven't got time, if you like, to have another 3 at the after the first 2. All of these things apply. And these, I think, are better as explanations as to what's going on, because they do apply to basically all the countries where
So sorry, but I'm going to move you on because
Yeah.
we have a problem, however it comes about. What can the state do about it? Because you've talked about this a lot, and we've often talked about this, falling birth rates. We basically surely need more of the next generation to pay for us, basically.
Yeah, so you don't want massive cliff edges where one generation is huge and the next generation is tiny. Now, well, this takes us to where Becker, I think, would be wrong. So he wouldn't be surprised by the collapse in birth rates. But what I think he would have to be surprised about is countries that apply economic incentives, which is what the Becker's economics was, countries that sort of like throw money at people to have kids, get relatively modest results from that. So Hungary has been Hungary really has put a lot of effort into sort of packages of financial support. And if it is just about economics, then obviously you would think financial support would entice people to have kids. But I think the view of Hungary is it might have slowed the decline in the birth rate, or might have marginally pushed it up. But, it hasn't solved what to Hungary looks like a kind of a very bad, decline in the birth rate. So it is interesting. I don't think, despite my sort of spending a few minutes on the great Gary Becker and his account of it all, I actually don't think economics can explain it all. I think social norms, fitting in,
Now, you talked about Hungary ploughing money into the problem. Did that account for childcare? Because, I mean, one of the shocking things when you become a parent, which is why you say you do the calculations, you can never quite account for just how expensive it's going to be to have to work and have someone look after your children. There are changes in policy, obviously. Increasingly, the government is subsidising childcare.
And that might make that you would think in principle would add to the number of children. But I think you still get to the point that might make it easier to have children. But when you think as a parent of how many children do I want to have and how long do I want my, if you like, my children under 10 to be part of my life, you might still think, well, 2 will do, and it doesn't need to be 3, 4. When I was at school, when I was at school, we had, I guess 3 was very normal, 3 kids, 4 not at all unusual.
Well,
They were the odd parents with 5, and
So-
1 was very unusual. But now that it does feel like it's changed quite a bit over the last 50 years, and people might be making the choice. All this stuff helps me have kids, but I still don't need many kids, and that's part of what the declining birth rate.
I mean, we've basically set up a system where you need both parents working to support a household. Now, I mean, I think there is an argument that actually once you get to 2, you've got the chaos, you've set up the childcare, you can tuck a few more in and just not buy the shoes and not do this.
They can pass down the clothes from one to the next. Yeah,
exactly. So there is arguably a system.
Economies of scale, in production of children. Yeah, no, I see that.
But maybe that's what the next economist should
But
work on.
I actually still think for all of this, I don't think the economics drives it all. I actually think social norms, expectations, looking at what other people are doing and thinking I'm going to do that, particularly expectations around the age at which you start having children, as you said, Sarah, makes a massive difference to the potential number of children you're likely to have. These are all, I think, all driving a lot of this. But all I say is you've got to keep saying, whatever it is that's driving it, it's not just here. It seems to be as far east as South Korea and Japan and China. Well, China's a special case because of the one-child policy. But it is not a kind of, it's not unique to us.
Yeah. There's one thing that we absolutely need to say as a result of Sam's research, which is the cost of raising a child. According to the Child Poverty Action Group, for a couple to raise a child to 18 in 2024, £260,000. That's why you have a lovely house and a beautiful environment.
Because I don't have kids, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, look, it's definitely...
That's why my house is chaos.
Yes, that's true. And I if you think of them as consumer goods, which I don't, by the way,
Okay.
if you think of children as consumer goods, the childless among us have different consumption choices, and others have kids.
I've got to tell you that one of our editors in my ear, who is a mother, has just said, should we think of them beyond the economic, that they do have some other value?
I actually am making the case. I do think economics does underpin. It's a really interesting test case, this, of where economics, without consciously driving it, probably does drive people's decisions to some extent in a subconscious way.
I don't.
But it doesn't.
Can I just say, am I allowed to completely disagree with you? I think it's the biological imperative.
Biology,
I think
economics.
that's how we evolved.
Yeah, and I must say, I don't think the economics drives it all. I will defend.
Even you will
economics.
accept that.
Even I'll accept that.